Ethan Walker had moved to the lake for peace, the kind of quiet you only hear after escaping city noise and HOA drama. His property sat beautifully just outside the HOA line, free from their rules, and for months his life was simple. That changed the morning he parked his newly restored cabin cruiser beside the dock. Before Ethan could finish tying the last rope, he heard the angry rumbling of a voice coming across the water. Karen Drayton, the HOA president, marching toward his private shoreline like she owned the entire lake. She didn't even live on his land, but she screeched that his boat was in violation of community visual standards and needed to be moved immediately. Ethan stared at her, stunned. He wasn't part of their HOA, and she knew it. But Karen leaned in inches from his face and whispered, "If you don't move it, we'll move it for you." Ethan didn't know it yet, but that threat was about to snowball into something far bigger and far uglier. The next afternoon, Ethan woke to the metallic clatter of chains and diesel engine noise echoing from the lakefront. He rushed outside barefoot and froze. A tow truck, hired by the HOA, was backing down his private driveway, preparing to hook onto his boat. Karen stood behind it with her arms crossed and a smug smile, directing the driver as though she were a general commanding a siege. Ethan put himself between the truck and his boat, demanding to know who authorized them onto his personal land. Karen showed a clipboard with HOA citations and late fee totals, as though the paperwork meant anything here. Ethan warned them they were trespassing, but Karen just smirked and told the driver, "Ignore him, he's emotional." The man shifted gears and kept backing up. Ethan reached into his pocket and made one call, to the sheriff. If Karen wanted to play this game, she was about to see what actual legal enforcement looked like. Sheriff Mills arrived minutes later, lights off, but tone serious. The tow driver stepped back when he saw the badge, while Karen rushed forward waving her paperwork and shouting that Ethan was violating community standards. Mills listened patiently, but the calm in his eyes shifted when Ethan pointed out the property line markers and the fact that he wasn't part of the HOA at all. Mills turned to Karen and asked the simplest, deadliest question. Do you have legal authority to enforce on land you don't own and over a homeowner who isn't under your charter? Karen's face drained of confidence, but she refused to step back, insisting they had jurisdiction because the lake is visible from HOA homes. The sheriff didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly along the property line, examining the ground, the survey markers, the dock, and the tow truck halfway to committing a crime. When he returned, his voice was low. "Karen, I need you to stop talking and start explaining how you thought any of this was legal." And Ethan saw the first flicker of doubt in her eyes.
That night, after the tow truck retreated and Sheriff Mills left with a stack of photos and a tense expression, Ethan received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, nervous, and terrified of being overheard. It was Mr. Rowan, the HOA treasurer. He confessed that Karen had ignored legal advice and pushed for Ethan to be fined, cited, and punished, simply because she didn't like the idea of someone living outside her control. Rowan whispered that she had drafted plans for tow attempts, property access, and even boating restrictions without majority approval. "She's going to escalate," he warned shakily. "Tomorrow she's taking this to the board in secret. She wants full authority to seize anything she considers an eyesore." Ethan leaned back in his chair, pulse steady, mind already moving. Karen had declared war, and now he had an insider feeding him ammunition. But Rowan ended with one final chilling warning. "Ethan, if you don't stop her soon, she won't just go after your boat. She'll come after the entire property." The next evening, Ethan parked his truck just outside the HOA clubhouse and watched from the tree line. Cars rolled up one after another, board members wearing suits far too serious for a lakeside community. Rowan had been right. Karen wanted a late-night vote when no regular members were present. Through the glass, he saw her standing at the podium, voice sharp and commanding as she presented a slideshow titled Visual Pollution and Property Control Action Plan. He couldn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. Every pointer she waved toward his house and boat told him exactly how bad this could get. One board member hesitated, asking if they even had jurisdiction outside HOA borders. Karen leaned in, eyes burning. If we don't control the shoreline now, this lake will look like a trailer park in 6 months. The vote began, and hands started going up. Ethan stepped back from the window, fists clenched. If he didn't move faster, the board would vote themselves the power to legally harass him into oblivion. The next morning, Karen acted like she already won. A convoy of HOA compliance officers, men in matching polos with clipboards and cameras, walked up Ethan's driveway like a tactical inspection squad. They didn't knock. They started photographing the boat, the deck, even the paint on his house, as though documenting evidence for trial. Ethan stood on the porch, silent and motionless, making them speak first. The lead officer finally announced they were issuing 27 infractions, ranging from glare from deck windows to boat size obstructing scenic harmony. Ethan almost laughed. None of this mattered. They had no authority. But he didn't bother arguing with clipboard soldiers. Instead, he took out his phone and filmed everything, including the boundary markers clearly identifying his land as outside the HOA. "Keep going," he told them calmly. "This is all evidence." One of the officers hesitated, glancing nervously back at Karen, who watched from the sidewalk with arms folded. She didn't blink. She was ready to push this until something broke, and she hoped that something was Ethan.
That afternoon, Sheriff Mills returned, not just to talk, but to set legal wheels in motion. He spread paperwork across Ethan's dining table, trespass reports, photographic evidence, timestamp logs, and the tow attempt. Mills said the county attorney was already reviewing the case. "Karen thinks this is an HOA dispute," he said quietly, "but this is criminal. Property invasion, unlawful towing attempt, abuse of authority." Ethan nodded, but Mills wasn't done. He revealed something bigger. He had reviewed the HOA charter. Karen didn't even have internal authority for half her actions. Vendors contracted, patrols hired, tow orders initiated. None had documented board approval. "If she wants a fight," Mills said, "then let's fight it by the book." Then he proposed a calculated move: serve Karen with formal notice and give her one final chance to back down. If she refused, the sheriff's office would escalate. Ethan agreed. They drafted the notice together and Mills slid it into an evidence envelope. The trap was set. Now they waited to see if Karen would step into it or blow past it entirely. That night, Rowan knocked softly on Ethan's door. He looked exhausted, face lined with stress. "I can't sleep knowing what she's doing," he said quietly. He handed Ethan a flash drive, a digital copy of internal HOA emails. Ethan plugged it in. What he saw was damning. Karen ordering HOA staff to make life unbearable until the boat is removed. A directive to create new rules targeting Ethan specifically. Off-the-record conversations admitting they knew they had no jurisdiction over his property. Rowan leaned forward, voice low. "She's breaking bylaws, ignoring votes, and using HOA funds without authorization. Half the board is scared to fight her." Ethan glanced up, realizing how dangerous this was for Rowan. Karen wasn't just running an HOA, she was running a private regime. And Rowan had just become the first defector. Ethan shook his hand and promised, "When this ends, you won't go down with her." Rowan nodded, relieved, but terrified, because if Karen discovered what he'd done, there would be consequences. 2 days later, Ethan received a letter via certified mail, thick, stamped, and designed to intimidate. It was a 23-page HOA enforcement dossier, demanding loud restrictions,
deck modification permits, boat relocation, view obstruction mitigation, monthly compliance behavior reviews. At the end, it spat out the threat of fines of up to $500 per day. Ethan sat at the table, flipping page after page. Nothing mattered. He wasn't under the HOA. But this was Karen's new tactic: bury him in paperwork and push him into financial exhaustion. He smiled to himself and placed the packet neatly aside. Sheriff Mills had just told him the county attorney was preparing sanctions of their own. So instead of responding to Karen, Ethan forwarded the entire packet to the sheriff along with the email evidence Rowan had given him. Karen thought she was attacking. She didn't realize she had just submitted written proof of harassment and abuse of authority straight into law enforcement hands. The next morning, HOA residents woke up to something shocking: a sheriff cruiser parked at the HOA clubhouse doors. Sheriff Mills didn't walk inside quietly. He strode in with full uniform presence and a badge that gleamed under fluorescent light. Residents peered through windows, whispering. Karen was livid. Mills placed a folder on the table and calmly laid down realities. HOA overreach, attempted illegal towing, public obstruction, harassment of a resident outside their jurisdiction, unauthorized expenditures of HOA funds. Karen tried to bark back, but Mills didn't raise his voice. The law didn't need volume. And witnesses later claimed they'd never seen Karen look so cornered. The sheriff's warning was simple: stop now or face criminal investigation and civil liability. But Karen wasn't someone who backed down. The moment Mills left, she slammed the door and turned to the board. If they want war, fine. We'll take this further. And Ethan realized something. She wasn't protecting the HOA anymore. She was protecting her ego. And people like that only stopped when someone made them.
Karen's pride had taken a hit, and prideful leaders become dangerous when cornered. The very next day, new construction signs appeared along the shoreline: HOA Private Lakeside Improvement Project. Trucks rolled in, fences went up, and HOA workers began laying down a floating aluminum dock extension right across the center of the cove, essentially blocking Ethan's direct path to open water. It wasn't an accident. It was engineered chokehold. If Ethan launched his boat, he'd have to idle at crawling speed around a narrow, shallow bend. After an hour, the dock doubled in size. By sunset, it extended into deep water like a steel middle finger pointed at Ethan. He stood on his own dock, hands in pockets, quietly watching. Karen wanted him to snap, yell, shove a worker, anything she could use as ammunition. But Ethan didn't even raise his voice. He simply picked up his phone and recorded everything. Because that dock wasn't just harassment. It was being built without county permits, and he already had proof. Inside the clubhouse that evening, HOA members filled chairs in tight rows, many frustrated, many confused. They whispered as they looked at the financial display projected on the wall: thousands of dollars unaccounted for, invoices signed without board approval, emergency reserve funds drained for public safety projects. Karen stood at the podium insisting everything was under control, but this time the room was not silent. A middle-aged mother stood first and said, "My childcare playground repairs have been pending 8 months, but you paid for a new dock overnight?" Someone else shouted, "We're risking legal fines, all because one guy bought a boat?" Even long-term HOA loyalists looked uneasy. Karen tightened her grip on the podium, eyes blazing. "This is about protecting our property values," she snapped. But value wasn't what people were thinking about. They were thinking about their wallets and how Karen had turned their dues into a personal war fund. Foot by foot, her power base was cracking. Later that night, Rowan texted Ethan one line: "I can't defend her anymore." Ethan met him outside near the streetlight mailbox cluster, where streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Rowan looked pale, stressed, and angry at himself. He opened an envelope and handed Ethan a printed report, projected HOA bankruptcy in 6 months if spending continued at its current burn rate. Rowan whispered, "If people realize this was all avoidable, they'll want someone blamed." Ethan studied him carefully. Rowan wasn't just scared of losing his property, he feared being dragged down as Karen's accomplice, so Ethan laid out the plan in calm voice. Let the HOA keep digging, document everything, give the county a complete ledger, let the law speak, not retaliation. Rowan exhaled in visible relief. "So, you're not burning it down?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm letting them set the fire themselves." Rowan realized something that chilled him. Ethan wasn't reacting emotionally. He was thinking like someone who'd spent years making measured decisions under real pressure. Karen had no idea who she'd picked a fight with.
3 days later, just after dawn, Ethan heard engines outside. Not construction trucks, county vehicles. 4 of them. Code enforcement officers stepped out with clipboards while a supervisor filmed the scene. Karen rushed out of her home in slippers, trying to play gracious host. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you?" The lead inspector didn't smile. "We're here to investigate unpermitted structures, environmental interference, and obstruction of public water access." Karen choked. Neighbors stood in driveways watching as inspectors surveyed the dock, took measurements, photographed concrete footers, and read aloud violations one by one. Several homeowners put hands over mouths as fines were explained, per day, per section, per missing permit. Someone whispered, "This could bankrupt the HOA." And for the first time since the war began, Karen looked genuinely shaken. She kept smiling, kept talking, but the officers weren't listening. This wasn't community politics anymore. This was government muscle. And her control over the narrative was slipping like sand through fingers. Because once the county writes up a violation, penalties don't stop until corrections do. Karen was cornered, and cornered people become unpredictable. That evening, as HOA homeowners whispered in driveways, Karen stormed into the clubhouse and locked the doors. Inside, she started shredding paperwork, meeting notes, spending logs, procurement receipts, anything that showed she had spent community funds without oversight. She dumped trash bags of torn paper into her back seat and sped off toward the community dumpster. But what she didn't know was that one quiet resident 2 houses down had recorded the entire thing, including the timing and plate number. By the time she returned home, frustrated and sweating, security footage from 3 homes was already forwarded to Rowan and Ethan. And just like that, Karen's attempt to erase her tracks became evidence of intentional wrongdoing. She hadn't just broken rules, she had tried to cover up the crime. Ethan sat at his lake house desk that night, uploading the entire folder into a private archive. Karen thought she was eliminating risk. Instead, she had just left fingerprints all over the crime scene. The next morning wasn't quiet. Mailboxes filled with special dues increase notices. Every homeowner was now being charged an emergency $2,500 assessment to cover unexpected legal expenses. People snapped. Residents knocked on doors, shouting in groups, demanding meetings. One father yelled in the cul-de-sac, "I'm not paying for a war I never agreed to." Another woman shouted, "She spent our money while threatening someone using his own lake." HOA trust didn't just crack, it shattered. People formed a community text group without Karen for the first time. Rowan, exhausted and numb, typed one message: "You all deserve to see the real numbers." Homeowners gathered around iPads, phones, and laptops as Rowan showed them the spreadsheets. Money drained for weaponized landscaping projects, legal threats, and construction that wasn't even legal. Gasps filled the room, followed by anger. Real anger. Someone finally asked the question out loud, "Can we vote her out?" Suddenly, for the first time in months, Ethan wasn't the only one fighting back. The community was waking up. That afternoon, Karen burst into Rowan's office and slammed the door. Her voice was sharp, demanding, trembling with rage. "You leaked our financials?"
Rowan didn't shake, didn't hesitate. "They're not our financials anymore. They're evidence." Karen's eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a hiss. "If I go down, you go down with me." Rowan just stared back. For once, not afraid. Not anymore. Karen realized the truth in that moment. She wasn't just losing the fight. She was losing control over the people she ruled. She paced like a wild animal, nails tapping the desk, trying to think of what leverage she still had. But then she saw Ethan outside through the blinds, standing on the dock with a calm expression, filing a document on his phone. He didn't even look at her, and somehow that enraged her more. Karen didn't just want to win, she wanted obedience. And Ethan's silence was the loudest rebellion she'd ever been confronted with. That night, Rowan called Ethan and said only 4 words. "It's happening tomorrow morning." An emergency HOA meeting, full board attendance, full membership vote, one item on the agenda: whether Karen should remain president. Rumors spread down the street like wildfire. Folding chairs were dragged into the clubhouse, coffee brewed, husbands and wives arrived with notebooks and highlighted dues statements. Even the sheriff showed up, not for enforcement, but as a neutral observer. Karen arrived last, heels echoing down the tile floor, acting like nothing was wrong. She stood at the front and launched into a dramatic speech about protecting standards, outsiders hurting property values, and sacrifices for the greater good. Nobody clapped. Then Rowan stepped forward and calmly presented the county citation report, the financial shortages, and the video evidence of document destruction. Gasps. Silence. Then murmuring. Karen tried to interrupt, but the sheriff raised a hand. "Ma'am, let him finish." And in that moment, Karen experienced something she'd never felt before: her own community refusing to take her side. When the vote came, people raised their hands, not to defend Karen, but to remove her from power. Karen stood frozen, staring at the clock on the wall, as the room collectively shattered her reign in under 5 minutes. The war wasn't over, but the endgame had officially begun. Most people, once voted out, would leave quietly. Karen was not most people. When the HOA attorney slid the removal form across the conference table, she shoved it back and stood up. "I do not accept this," she declared, voice trembling with rage. "You don't have a choice," Rowan replied. Karen grabbed her purse like a soldier grabbing her rifle. She rushed out of the clubhouse, heels hammering the floor, and neighbors instinctively stepped back to give her space. She stormed to her SUV, slammed the door, and sped off. Inside the car, she wasn't just angry, she was unraveling. She called every contact she had: the landscaper, the treasurer, the old HOA partners, even a retired judge she once knew. Not one answered. Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was a dethroned ruler with no army left. But she still had one weapon.
Ethan was sitting on his dock that evening, the lake calm and glowing under the setting sun, when his phone buzzed. Rowan. "You need to know something," Rowan said. "There's a second bank account." Ethan didn't react outwardly, but inside, everything clicked into place. That's where the unchecked spending came from. A shadow account, unregistered, unauthorized, and almost certainly illegal. Rowan continued quietly. "Karen is the only signer. If she sees what's coming, she might drain it or try to move assets." Ethan understood instantly. If they didn't move fast, Karen could destroy not just evidence, but the entire financial welfare of the neighborhood. He thanked Rowan and hung up. Then he made the call he'd been holding back for weeks. "Sheriff Blake, it's time." Morning came.
And for the first time in weeks, the lake community was peaceful. Until 3 sheriff cruisers turned onto Karen Street. Neighbors peeked through blinds, stood on porches, held coffee mugs frozen halfway to their lips. Karen opened the door, pretending to look annoyed, rather than terrified. "What now?" she snapped. Sheriff Blake wasn't smiling. "Ma'am, we have questions about missing HOA funds and unauthorized accounts." Karen tried to deflect. "This is harassment. I have every right," but the sheriff calmly laid the documents on the table inside her home. Transaction logs, check numbers, off-books payments. Her face went pale. The sheriff spoke quietly but firmly. "Unless you can provide immediate documentation, you're officially under financial investigation." Karen sat down slowly. She realized she wasn't fighting Ethan anymore. She was fighting the law. With Karen neutralized and the HOA now under adult supervision, homeowners met again, this time without shouting. The decision was unanimous. The illegal dock was to be dismantled. All HOA fees tied to the war would be reversed. Lake usage rules would be rewritten fairly for everyone, including lakefront homeowners like Ethan. 2 days later, construction workers, this time county-approved and supervised, removed the entire metal dock segment Karen built. Ethan stood on his own dock as the last pieces were hauled away. A breeze rolled across the water. His boat floated freely again. Neighbors walked over apologizing for how long it took to see the truth. One older man shook Ethan's hand and said, "We needed you here. You pushed back when we were too scared." For the first time since moving in, Ethan felt something real. Belonging. Karen didn't go to jail that day, but she did face exactly the punishment she feared most. Full financial audit. Charges pending for misusing HOA funds. Removal from all leadership roles. Personal repayment required for unauthorized spending. When she tried one last tantrum at the county office, the clerk simply pointed to her file tray and said, "Ma'am, you did this to yourself." Meanwhile, something unexpected happened for Ethan. Sheriff Blake, impressed by Ethan's patience, invited him to speak at a regional workshop about property rights and homeowner protections. And developers from the next county over made an offer. They wanted Ethan to become a paid advisor for lake community planning. From a quiet new homeowner to the man who changed an entire neighborhood. As Ethan sat on his dock that final evening, boat floating freely, water calm and golden beneath a perfect sunset, he realized something. He didn't win by shouting louder. He won by being smarter, patient, and unstoppable.